I just want to pause and make at least a personal note. As soon as we started singing in Spanish, I just started crying. And I some of it's because you guys heard a little bit of my story already. That's where Jesus called me to himself, was in Spain. And so you know how trauma doesn't have a timeline? I don't know if you know that, but if you experience significant trauma in your life, when something that's like that event kind of triggers you, it's like you're right back in that moment again. I think that's true also about when God breaks into your life and does a remarkable work. It's like felt like I was just brought back to Spain, and I was singing in Spanish for the first time as a new believer in Christ. And it was just so special. I didn't expect it. It caught me off guard, and I immediately thought about, returning to your first love. And I felt like the Lord just gave me that moment to say, remember when I called you? And if we're not careful, we forget what it was like when we first tasted afresh the grace of Christ and the love of our Father. And so I'm a little emotional, if I'm honest, and that's okay. That's all we've been talking about, so that's good. If you're, to our brothers who just joined us, I know you guys were teaching on maybe some a little bit different content, and I just want to catch you up a little bit on what we've been talking about here. And before I do that, I want to just pause because a bunch of you have been asking, like, is this in a book somewhere? And it's supposed to have been in a book about a year ago. But it's just taking me a lot longer to write because it's just so much more internal work that I'm still doing to be able to write it. But if you are interested in staying informed about when that book comes out, you can just take a picture of the QR code, and we'll keep you informed about that along the way. Also, I've learned that sometimes when you talk about the things we've been talking about and that we're going to talk about tonight, it kind of like taps something in us. So like for some of you where you're like, I didn't even know that I needed to work on this, right? I didn't even know it was a problem or an issue or something I should attend to. And I don't care how old you are. I remember the very first time I talked on some of this stuff, and it was just a short 45-minute talk. I was speaking on gospel fluency in South Carolina, and the guy who did the work with me finally gave me permission to start talking about it out loud. And it was a very short talk, and something happened in the room. I don't know. It was like the Spirit of God just convicted old men and young men that they needed to attend to their hearts. And I was a part of a ministry called Tin Man Ministries. I still am, but some of you guys don't know my journey of recovery that started about 5.5 years ago in February 2020. It started with me meeting with a Tin Man coach once a week for 14 months, and he just sat on the other side of me and helped me work out my emotions. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as I go through the text tonight, but I bring that up because at that first time when I spoke about it in a public setting, Tin Man Ministries got 30 intake calls from that event that next week. Because there are a whole bunch of people, and I won't, obviously I'm not going to tell you any of them, but you would know some of them. They write books, they lead denominations, like something happened. And I've been hearing about ripples from that event, how so many of these men took seriously their own emotional health, and it changed their marriages, and it changed how they lead their organizations. And I only bring that up because I want to make sure if that happened to you and you're like, I don't know what to do next, just give you a few options. One, you can just email us at hello@saturatetheworld.com and let us know if you want anything, okay? So if you wanted that chart that I showed this morning, we'll send that to you. If you want more teaching, we'll send that to you. If you want more videos, whatever, just let us know if there's a way we can help you. Some of you actually need someone to be on the other side of you and walk you through this. And so we provide coaching. If that's helpful, you can go to our site and look up one-to-one leadership coaching. It's a drop-down you can click on. But then I'll also acknowledge Tin Man Ministries because a lot of what I'm talking to you about, I received from them. And I want to honor them and what I received in their process Not only did I do 14 months of weekly meetings, but I did a 1-week intensive where we unpacked my story in very in-depth ways to experience a lot of healing that I needed to experience as a 51-year-old leader. I'm 56 now, but that was 5 years ago. So I just wanted to offer you that. With that said, I want to come back to what I was saying earlier. I just am very, very aware of the fact that most of us don't want to be known as weak. Right? I mean, oftentimes, I won't have you show of hands, but oftentimes I'll say, how many in the room want to have other people think you're weak or needy? And if I were to ask that, almost no hand would go up. Which is crazy, because we have the Apostle Paul at the end of his life, talking about this thorn in the flesh that he asked God to remove 3 times. And he said that the Lord just kept saying no. And he finally wanted Paul to know, it's like, Paul, it's when you're weak that my power can be perfected in you. When you think you have it all together, when you think you don't need anybody, when you don't think you need me, that's when you're walking in the flesh. But when you walk in the Spirit, it's because you're aware of your needs. You're embracing your weakness. So Paul says, I would much rather boast in my weakness, that the power of Christ might be made perfect in me or manifested in me, than I would in the things that I could boast in that I've accomplished or that I'm strong in. And tonight, that's what this is going to be about, just to be clear. It's an invitation for you to embrace your humanity. Because if you don't think God intended you to be a weak human, then you haven't read the Bible. Okay? Every time someone tried to be more than what God created them to be, they got themselves in trouble. And I don't need to go through all the stories, you know many of them, but over and over and over, it's a failure of humanity to trust God and instead put their trust in themselves. And every time, it leads to destruction. So I want to encourage you to embrace your weakness tonight. That's been my hope this last day and a half. Those of you who are joining us, we started with the prodigal story. Tim Keller affectionately calls it the prodigal God, because prodigal means the one who spent everything. And it was God who spent everything, not the son, not the younger son. He spent the father's inheritance. He spent the father's stuff, right? And I love that, because I think it shows our generous God towards you and me. But we started there, and I asked people to identify who they might most identify with, the lost son who ran away to find something that the father already had for him to receive at home, or the older brother who was working faithfully for the father but couldn't celebrate the younger brother's return. Gary and I were actually talking at the break, and he said, I would even offer that maybe part of the problem there is that you've got a faithful follower of God, in our case of Jesus, who is really having a hard time forgiving the ones who are so unfaithful. Because they don't understand grace. They don't understand the nature of forgiveness. And so maybe that's the way, maybe that's some of you here. It's like people have hurt you, or you've tried your hardest to faithfully follow him, but you're watching others like, how come they get to come in at the end and act like they receive it all when they did nothing, like the thief on the cross, right? Or maybe like I offered, maybe you're the older brother who's been religiously lost, possibly. Who's been in the church, who's been trying to faithfully observe all the commandments, try to be faithful, a tender, giver, server, and yet you feel very, very disconnected from God, even though you're in the house, but you're very far away. We started there, and I just wanted to catch up those of you who weren't with us. I asked if you might consider who you most identify with in that story. And then this morning we talked about how the younger brother came to his senses, and the English Standard Version says he came to himself. I love that, because really coming to your senses is waking up to your reality, to what's going on inside of you. And in Genesis, when God chases after Adam in Genesis 3, he says, where are you? And I clarified that that's not because God doesn't know where Adam is, but because Adam doesn't know where Adam is. And so God's inviting Adam to wake up, to come to his senses, to come to himself. And the way that he came to himself and came to his senses was he felt his feelings. I was afraid. You might also add, he felt shame. And so he ran and he hid and he covered up. And our feelings, if we're not attending to them or aware of them, will lead us to have desires, and those desires will find a way to get met. And if we're not paying attention to our internal world, we'll wonder how we got to where we ended up at. And we'll look back and say, what did I do? So that was this morning, is let's pay attention to how God's given us the gift of feelings from little boys, little babies born into the world who could feel and make their needs known through their crying. Let's pay attention to them and become like children once again and cry out to the Lord from the internal cavities of our soul. And I called that confession, when we say out loud what's going on inside. And so tonight I'm going to take us to a passage that kind of helps us walk through that. But what I want to kind of put in front of you is that if we're going to learn how to attach to God in honest ways, we generally learn how to do that with each other. Okay, I don't know about you, but I've learned how to have a relationship with God by having relationships with people. And that sounds weird, but it's God's plan, right? Remember when I started, we talked about how we're made in the image of God, meant to be a physical display of what he's like. And Jesus is the fullest display of the deity in bodily form, but now we are the body of Christ, the church. And the way the world comes to know how to relate to God is by relating to his people. We do have one mediator, Jesus. I'm not taking that away. Please don't hear that. But he's the head of the church, and through us, he's making an appeal. We are his ambassadors. We are demonstrating what he's like. We're inviting people into a relationship. And the way people learn how to relate to God is by learning how to relate to his people. And we fail. I know we fall short. But this is why our parents' nurture or lack of nurture in our lives was such a big deal, because it was always God's intent to display what he's like through humans. It's always been his intent. And so in order for us to learn how to practice showing up with our real self, we got to do it with each other. Okay? Does that make sense? That's why we confess our sins one to another. That's why we rejoice with one another and weep with one another. That's why there's so many one another's in the scriptures, because the way you learn how to interact with God is by learning how to interact with his people. Okay? Please know this. You can't have a privatized faith. It's just not possible. That's why the majority of the New Testament is written to a plural. Now, we're not in the South, but it's all y'all when it says you. Okay? It's rarely just you as an individual, unless Paul's writing specifically to a person, and then it's super clear. But the majority of it's written to the people of God collectively, because we're called to live this out in community. So if you've been told, I got my private prayer life, I got my private Bible reading, I've got my quiet time, which, by the way, I hope it's not quiet, because I hope God's speaking during that time to you. But if that's all you got, that's not how God intended you to live. Genesis 2, he creates man. He says everything is good all the way up till the creation of Adam, and then he says this isn't good. It's not good that man's alone. I must make a helper suitable for him. And that picture of a husband and a wife is not meant to be only experienced between a man and woman, but there's also this idea that we're supposed to be brothers. We're supposed to have sisters. We're supposed to have a family. We're supposed to experience community. We're supposed to experience the nature of the communal God, Father, Son, and Spirit in the church with one another. So that I want to just set it up with that idea that we've got to learn how to do this with each other. The way I'll say it is, I'm going to encourage you to start showing up with your feelings that reveal your needs, so you can be weak with one another before God and invite God to meet your needs with one another. Okay? Okay? So we're going to look at Ephesians 4. By the way, I'll tell you something. You know what? A lot of us don't really read God's word very well until the word changes us, and then we read it differently. You with me on that one? Like now, I can't not read the Bible and see emotions everywhere. And I'm not like reading them onto the text, like they're all over the Bible. Okay, why? Because our God is an emotional God. Our God has feelings. Okay, if that surprises you, read your Bible. Okay, because it's all over the pages of Scripture. Now, before I jump into this passage, we're in Ephesians 4, verse 17. That's where we're going to start. I did want to catch some of you up because some of you I left hanging on the story of my daughter and her boyfriend who was not yet a believer. Time passed. We grew really close to Guy and Milani and Aiden, my daughter's boyfriend, and Kainoa. And there came a moment when it was really clear Haley knew she needed to break up with him. And they were upstairs in our house, and I heard him come down the stairs, and he was just bawling. And he came straight to me, and he fell on my shoulder, and he's a very tall guy. You can see I'm pretty short. Most people are like, when they meet me, they're like, you're a lot shorter than you look in video. I'm like, that's just how it works. He's about 6'1", and he's just like this, and he just collapses on my shoulder and just pours out his heart, crying over me because my daughter just broke his heart. And I'll tell you what, I wouldn't have been able to do that 7 years ago because I didn't have access to be able to feel sad for the guy I actually wanted my daughter to break up with. But you know what? My heart has been so changed by Christ that I actually can weep with somebody even though I'm also thankful it's happening. And that's weird, I know it is, but I didn't want, you guys heard my story, I didn't want my daughter to stay with a non-believer. And he's a great guy. He's an amazing guy. And that's why I thought I was so scared, because if he was a jerk, it'd be easy, right? But he was a great guy. Well, what I didn't tell you is that not only did that happen, my daughter's now dating an amazing Christian young man, and we absolutely love him. And Janie regularly tells him that he's our favorite child. It's kind of a joke, but he's pretty amazing. And here's what's really cool. Aiden and Guy and Milani and Kainoa, his brother, are all in our church every Sunday now. If Aiden were here, he would tell you he believes in Jesus and has experienced him forgiving of his sins. He hasn't gotten baptized yet, and so we're just waiting for him to get to that place. His dad, because we have a listening time of prayer in our little church gathering at the end of our gathering, his dad said he got a vision just a few weeks ago, and we said, what was that vision? He said it was of water, and then he started to cry, and we were like, do you want to share more? And he's like, no. And one of our members said, was it about baptism? And Guy said, yeah, I saw me and my sons all getting baptized together. Now, I want to tell you, I think a big part of that was because I learned how to be present with them. I'm going to talk about this more tomorrow, but one of the names we know of our God is He is Emmanuel, God with us. And when we don't know how to be with people, I mean in a real, genuine way, feeling their pain, joining them in their sadness, walking alongside of them in their loneliness, it's hard for them to believe that God would do that. Because if a human who has flesh is right in front of them can't do it, why would somebody they can't see do it? This is what I think 1 John 4 is all about, that if you know God who is love, and yet who you can't see, but you fail to love your brother who you can see, John's conclusion is, I don't know that you know God. Because if you knew Him and you were abiding in Him, then you would love your brother. And so I just want to, tonight, my plea to you is, could we all be willing to be weak and available? Weak and available. Could we all say, we need Jesus together, and are we willing to be available for one another so we can tell each other how we need Him tonight? Because that's where we're going to go. I just want to prepare you. Some of you need a little bit more time to prepare where I'm taking it. That's where we're going. Okay? And I'm going there because of Ephesians 4. Paul says this, I say and I testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do. Now, for those of you who don't know what that means, for Paul, a Gentile is someone not yet in the family, not yet connected to the Father, not yet having faith in Jesus Christ. So in a sense, kind of like an outsider. Think of it that way. So we aren't going to walk like them anymore in the futility of their minds. They're darkened in their understanding. And this is the phrase I really want you to catch. This is what we've been talking about the last couple of days. Alienated from the life of God. Remember, eternal life is that they would know you, which is to be connected relationally to God. So these people are disconnected. They're alienated from the life of God. Because of the ignorance that's in them, so they don't know the truth. But don't miss this, due to the hardness of heart. Paul is saying the problem isn't they don't have enough information. By the way, I've been in this long enough. Information by itself will never save anybody. People need to have an encounter with the living God. People need to have their heart changed by him. People need to go from having a hard heart of stone to a soft heart of flesh. And only God can do that. But you can want that. And there may be some of you here in this, even here, you're like, God's always felt far from me. I've always felt cold to him. He's always felt like he doesn't know me or care for me. And I'm just telling you, it's very possible that this describes you. That the ignorance that stuff doesn't make sense or land or change you might be because your heart is hard. And your heart needs to be softened by the Spirit. My prayer is tonight your heart will be softened. And there are some of you who've been in the faith for a long time, and it's sad, but it's true. Some of us, our hearts grow hard. Right? We forget our first love. We get hardened because of this world and sin and the deceitfulness of it. And maybe for some of you, God needs to crack that heart again. He needs to soften it. He needs to break it in the best possible way to make you able to receive his love and his grace again. Now he goes on, he says, they become callous. So that's one translation. I put in the parentheses 3 other translations and how they translate this from the Greek to the English. One says they've lost sensitivity. Another says, this is the King James, the New King James says, they've moved past feeling or even feeling their feelings, which I would have never thought the King James would have got this one right. Right? That all these who are your King James only people like, what, way to go, you won on this one. Another version says they have no shame. And I talked about healthy shame this morning, and this is where I get it from, that there's a sense that healthy shame says I'm aware of my needs and my limitations and that I'm not good all by myself. I need people. I'm a needy person. He goes on and he says, and let me just say it again, the people who are hard-hearted are hard-hearted because they become calloused or they've lost sensitivity or they've moved past having feelings or they have no shame, which is no recognition of how needy they really are. Because of that, they've given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice every kind of pure impurity. By the way, the more that you don't recognize your need for God, the more that you go to places to have your desires met in ways that are broken and sinful. Okay? The greatest thing you can have is an acute awareness of how needy you are for God so you won't go to other places to get cheap substitutes. That's part of what I was sharing this morning, that addiction is when you try to meet a relational need in a non-relational way. You were made for him. You were made to be most satisfied in him and in one another. Both. Paul continues. So please don't, I hope you catch this. The way of the Gentile, the way of the disconnected person from God, the way of the unbeliever, is a person who doesn't pay attention or have feelings, who isn't willing to be sensitive to their needs, who wants to pretend like they don't need anybody. That's that hard heart, okay? Which is why for me, emotions have become so important, because I've realized the more that I've been able to believe Jesus' words that blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the kingdom. You just keep going through the whole thing. It's all about being in need and being aware of it and embracing it. He goes on, he said, but that's not the way you learned Christ. And he's speaking to followers of Jesus. He's speaking to people connected to God. But he's reminding them because it's easy to forget. It's not the way you learned Christ, assuming that you heard about him and were taught in him as the truth is in Jesus. And I just want to pause on this a minute. What did they learn? what did they learn when they talk about learned Christ? That's kind of a weird phrase, by the way, and there's actually not an equivalent in the Greek of this particular phrase. It's kind of a unique way of saying something, so there's quite a bit of work that we have to do to kind of understand what is he talking about. And I won't, there's a lot more that I could say about it, but I don't have enough time. I'm just going to say one part of it. One part of it, I'm convinced, is that the way you learned Christ is that you learned that Christ entered into the world as a man dependent on God and people. Because that's what he's talking about here. He's going, you didn't learn Christ in a way that was like the Gentiles, where they were calloused, unaware of their needs, completely desensitized. That's not how you learned him. You learned about Christ, who came into the world crying as a baby, fully dependent on his mother and father, right? If any of you sat in Dr. Bashir's workshop, he talked about how sometimes in the gospel we just talk only about the cross and we forget the resurrection. I would add, we also forget his life, right? Because if you don't have the life of Jesus, the cross and the resurrection doesn't count for anything, because we needed someone who lived our life, right? And I know he would say that. I'm not correcting him, just so you know. I'm not correcting my professor publicly in this moment. But I will tell you, how many times have you heard a sermon? We worship a man, a human. We talk about Jesus God, but he's also fully human. He went through everything you and I go through. He was just as needy as you and I were. He cried just like we did. He pooped his pants just like we did. He was lonely and sad and scared, just like we were as a little baby. Please don't think that, like, you got, maybe you got Will Ferrell's version of him from Talladega Nights, Jesus in his baby golden diaper. It's like, no, he was a normal kid just like us. He was a teenager who gets lost, he's hanging out at the temple and parents are like, where'd he go? Right? I hope that you're learning Christ in a way that says he was human and he felt what we feel and he went through what we went through, and yet he was without sin. I love the writer of Hebrews, chapter 2, verse 10, when he says Jesus learned or became perfect through his suffering. Now, I'm going to be clear. It doesn't mean that Jesus was a sinner and then he stopped sinning. It's that he wasn't complete until he did all that he was set to do, which included his suffering at the cross. Amen. And you know what? To be a complete human means he not only had to live our life in our place, being for us the example, but also righteousness of God, the very righteousness of God. But he also went to the cross and suffered in our place. And he could say, I know what you've gone through because I've gone through everything you've gone through. Everything. When I'm with someone who's experienced abuse, I want them to know Jesus was abused. He was. What he went through with the crucifixion, if you know much about it, it was abuse in all forms. Every way. He was mocked. He was rejected. He was abandoned. He was afflicted. I mean, he went through it all. You and I have a God who suffered. It's what makes Christianity distinct from any other religion. We have a God who's willing to put on skin and live the life we live in our place for our good, so that we would have a high priest who actually feels what we feel. And Paul is saying this because he's saying, don't grow hard in your hearts. Don't be like the Gentiles who lose all sensitivity. Don't pretend like you don't have needs. Jesus in John 5 says to the Father, Father, the Son can do nothing on his own, but only what he sees the Father doing. Whatever the Father does, the Son does likewise. Jesus was as dependent of a human on the Father as anyone who's ever lived. And he wants you and I to follow in his steps. Right. The more I grow in the faith, the more I realize how desperately in need of God I am. The people I respect the most are not the ones who act like they have it all together. It's the ones who know without him they can do nothing. I'm not saying they're not walking in righteousness and ongoing sanctification. I'm just saying they know it's because of Christ in them and their need for him that happens. It's not the way you learn Christ. You didn't learn Christ by saying, look at how much I've got together. Look at how strong I am. Look at how I'm so independent. That's not how you learned him. He goes on, he said, the truth is in Jesus, and in doing this, you put off your old self. That's the old man, which belongs to the former manner of life. What is that former manner of life? Isolation, self-sufficiency, dependency on only me. That's the old way of life. Under the authority and power of the dominion of darkness, who's got me so deceived that I don't need God, that I try to live life in absolute isolation. That's the old way. But the new way is completely different. But that old way is corrupt through deceitful desires. Now, I want to pause here for a second. And I hesitated to do this. I was like wondering, Lord, Spirit, should I do this? Should I say this? And I just sense that I think I'm supposed to. So I hope you'll hear it in a way that I hope doesn't dishonor. And that's why I hesitate. Several years ago, I was training leaders in Indonesia. I did it over video. They were business leaders, young business leaders, many of them who had inherited significant wealth or companies. But they loved Jesus and they wanted to lead their companies in a way that honored Jesus. And before I got on with all the young professionals, the guy who put the thing together said, Jeff, I just want to prepare you. They all just heard the news about Ravi Zacharias. And he's like a spiritual father to all of them. So I have a feeling they're going to want to talk about that. I said, okay, we'll just see how it goes. Sure enough, I didn't even get to do any content. The first question they asked, someone said, hey, before we do anything, can you just help us understand how Robbie could have done what he did? And do you think he was a Christian? I said, well, the second question is not mine to answer, though I really hope he was. I saw a lot of great things in his life, and I was really blessed by the things he said, but I don't know him, like, personally, so I can't answer that. I said, but I'll try to do my best about the first question. And I said, and once again, because I don't know him, I'm just speculating. And some of you know the story of Robbie, but I'm not going to tell you all of it. It'll be enough just to hear what I told them. I said, I don't know him, but I do wonder if Robbie experienced significant loss in his life. Maybe when he was young or maybe even older, but I know a lot of his culture would teach him to just press on and not deal a lot with the sadness and the loss. I just wonder if he never really mourned losses in his life. And because our sadness needs comfort, I wonder if he then went to places that were inappropriate to receive comfort. I don't know, but I would just wonder. I said, I wonder if he experienced significant pain in his life that was never attended to because our hurt needs attention and healing. And so then I wonder if he went to places where he could get attention, but it wasn't the kind of attention that he really needed. So I wonder, being on the road, because I am also on the road a lot and I know what it's like, and I wonder if he was really lonely, but he wasn't willing to talk about how lonely he was, bring that to his wife or his family or his coworkers or to God. I just wonder, because sometimes we're afraid to admit how lonely we really are. I wonder then if it's in his loneliness, because the need of loneliness is to have someone see you and know you. I wonder if he then went to inappropriate places to be seen and to be, quote unquote, known. So I don't know why he did what he did. And at this point, I don't want to talk about him anymore. I want to ask you, do you know what you want? Do you know what's going on inside of you? Do you know what your desires are leading you to do? Because here's the reality about desires. Desires are like roots of an oak tree, and they will break through cement to get what they want. And sometimes you'll find yourself saying, how in the world did I get here? And I took him to James, and I said, I think that's what James 4 is talking about, that these desires wage war within us, and if we aren't paying attention to them, They're going to cause havoc in our relationships. And James says you don't have what you want because you don't ask. And I think what he's saying is you don't even have a clue what you really want. Because when you ask with wrong motives. And I think what he's saying is you don't have an idea of the internal desires in your heart because you're not attending to your internal world. And I guess I don't want to go past this passage because he says your old life was all about deceitful desires. Because you were callous, because you shut off your feelings, because you weren't paying attention to your senses, those desires don't just go away. You just become blind to them. And you know what? They will find a way. I've been in ministry for quite a while. I'm 56. And I mean, we're all in ministry, but in vocational form as a youth pastor and a church planter. And so I started when I was 21. You can do the math. I can't count anymore how many leaders I've seen fallen. It breaks my heart. Friends of mine have taken their lives. You heard me talk about Randy, but I got more friends that took their life. He's not the only one. And finally, I got enough anger. Some of you heard how anger can be a good thing. I finally said, enough. I'm going to devote my life not only to helping people become disciple makers, but I'm tired of seeing my brothers in arms fall left and right. Like I want to get after our hearts. And part of it's this passage, because the old way of life is to be deceived and have your desires take over and lead you into all kinds of forms of sensuality and impurity and debauchery and brokenness. And I'm just telling you, brothers, I don't want that for any of you. Some of you may be in that right now, and I just want to say, it's not too late. But I sometimes wonder if some of these men would have just said, can I just tell the truth to somebody who won't condemn me and immediately reject me? Because that's one of my concerns, especially if you're a pastor in the room, is that you aren't safe to tell the truth about what you struggle with. And so you stay in secrecy, and it gets hidden. And you know what happens in hiddenness? It festers, and it gets worse. And it will rot your soul. Do not stay in hiding. In fact, what Paul then continues on after he says, we're going to put away the old and put on the new, created after the likeness of God. And he says this, in true righteousness and holiness. We want to walk in a new way. But then he says this is how you do it, or this is the therefore. In light of everything I've just said, put away all falsehood. Let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor. For we're members of one another, and that has multiplicity of meaning. One, what we do affects each other. Right. Years ago, there was a movement of pastors trying to bring unity in the east side of Seattle. And I only know this story because I came many, many years later and was trying to bring unity, and an older gentleman said, I don't think you know what happened here. Could we have lunch together? I said, sure. And he said, we had lunch. We started telling me, Jeff, we had about 20 churches all working together for the sake of Jesus' fame on the east side of Seattle. And one of the pastors was being accused of touching boys and men in the baptistry and sexually molesting some people. And he denied it and denied it and denied it. It was the biggest church in Seattle at the time. And they were heading up to an evangelistic crusade where they had over 20,000 people attending, and he was going to give the call to respond. And before he got up, they were in the room praying together, and they said, did you do it? Is this true? Because if it is, please confess it. He said, I guarantee you I did not do it. And he got up, and this is a very gifted evangelist, prone to seeing many, many people come to respond to Jesus when he preached the gospel. And he got up and he proclaimed the gospel and he called for a response. And out of 20,000 plus people, not one person came forward. And all the men looked at him and said, you've been lying. And it finally all came out. And you know what this brother told me? He said, Jeff, people aren't going to want to work together anymore because we all lost our reputation because of that one leader. People said, we don't trust you. You leaders, you're hiding stuff. And it took years to rebuild trust on the east side, and we're still working on it. And I'm not trying to put that pastor down. Please don't hear that. I'm just saying we're members of one another, so what we do affects each other. We're one body. But the other side of it is we're members of one another, so we should care about each other. Like that's the other side. It's like, look at, this is your family forever. I know some of you are going like, man, that's hard for me to have to live with because some of these people I'd rather not spend eternity with, but they'll be better then, I promise. We're members one another. And here's what Paul says, don't miss it. Put away all falsehood and speak the truth to one another. Another way of saying this is remove the veil. Get rid of the fig leaves. Stop covering up. And then he goes on and he says, you know how you do that? You have a feeling. Be angry. I used to read this as a separate idea. Like you end the thought, speak the truth with your neighbor, we're members of one another. New thought. By the way, when it comes to anger, that's not what he's saying. He's saying, I want you to put away all falsehood. I want you to speak the truth to one another. Start being angry and don't sin. And don't let the sun go down your anger. Now, some of you are going like, that's hard. Why did you choose that one? I think he chose anger. Well, he's quoting Psalm 4:4, just to be clear. But I think he chose it because I think it's the one that we think is the hardest to do without sinning. Right? Most people are like, you can't be angry and not sin. Everybody sins when they're angry. Well, God seems to be okay being angry at the right things. There is a holy, righteous anger. We talked about that this morning. But what I love what he's saying there is, he's saying, start showing up with one another. Because it's inside of you. Strip back the falsehood, pull back the layers, take away the fig leaves, and start showing up. Be angry, but don't sin. In other words, don't stuff it in the dark. And that's what he says next. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. You know what I was told, young Jeff getting married, someone sat down and said, when you and Janie have a fight and it's getting late, you've got to resolve that fight before the sun goes down. By the way, that's terrible advice. I promise you, it's bad advice. If the sun is going down and you're still fighting, you're too tired. Go to sleep, wake up in the morning, it'll all look different. I don't think that's what Paul is saying. I don't think he's saying speed up your process so you can just get over things. I think he's saying don't put your emotions in the dark. Stop stuffing stuff. Stop acting like it isn't real. If you have real anger, you got to talk about that. If you got real sadness, you got to express that. If you got real hurt, you better have a place to process that. This is what I grieve for many of the leaders that I know that have fallen. I wonder, I just sit there and go, because I got to talk to the guy who traveled with Ravi, and I asked him a lot of questions after it happened. And I'm like, how did no one know? He's like, he was a very lonely man. He said, I traveled with him and I didn't know him. And I'm like, that is not the way we ought to live. None of us should be that isolated. None of us should be that lonely. None of us should be that hidden. And so what I want to do tonight in the time that we have is we're going to talk a little bit more about a process tomorrow morning that's going to break it up even more. But what I want to do tonight is I just want to give you a chance to put away the falsehood, to speak truthfully to one another. And I'm going to walk through those 8 emotions and just give you a chance. They're not going to be on the screen. I'm just going to go through one at a time. But I'm going to start with Jesus as we go through them, because we learned Christ, the human, who felt what we feel, who sympathizes with us as we feel it. And so I want to make sure it's all about how we go to Jesus with it. And I'll just start with Jesus felt deep sadness. He was a man of sorrows and acquainted with much grief. He wept over Jerusalem. At his friend Lazarus' tomb, even though he was about to raise him from the dead, he wept, because that's what Mary needed in that moment. She needed someone to be present with her in her loss. And this is one thing I'm certain of Jesus. He is the most present human in every moment. He wasn't in the next moment of resurrection. He was in the present moment of loss. And some of you in the room, you've gone through some significant loss. I already know because some of you talked to me about it. You lost a friend. You lost a spouse. lost a job. You lost a dream. You lost a child. Maybe not physically, but maybe you're still wondering if they're ever going to return to you. I'm just telling you, don't stuff that. Don't pretend like it's not a big deal. If you had someone tell you, get over that, I'm just telling you, that's a lie from the evil one. You don't get over it, you go through it with Jesus, the man of sorrows. In a little bit, I'm going to give you a chance to identify with somebody else one or more of these feelings you have and the needs that you have for Jesus to meet, okay? So that's the first one, sadness. The second thing we know, Jesus definitely felt some significant anger. He felt anger at Lazarus' tomb. I think he was really angry about what sin has done to us in bringing about death. I think he was also angry because people still couldn't see what he could do for them. And then at the temple, we know he turned the temple tables over because people made it harder to get to God. And I'm telling you what, I get really angry about that in my city of Seattle when I watch people make it harder for them to come to Jesus. Maybe there's some of you who are like, man, I got to be honest. I have told myself it's not okay to be angry, but I'm telling you, if you see injustice, if you see Jesus' name being defamed, if you see people getting destroyed in their life, I tell you, I hope you have a little anger for that. And what anger needs, sadness needs comfort, anger needs an opportunity for you just to have some care in your life and speak out about it to somebody. Maybe some of you just need to be angry and not sin tonight. You know, we also know that Jesus was really hurt. His friends abandoned him. Judas betrayed him. They couldn't even stay with him awake while he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, praying in his worst moment. Maybe that's some of you, you've been hurt. Someone's betrayed you. Someone's abandoned you. Someone's rejected you. And you've been telling yourself, it's not a big deal. I'm going to get over it. I'm just telling you, it's a big deal because you matter. You matter. And God is near to the brokenhearted, and it's by his wounds that you can be healed. Jesus was sad. He was angry. He was hurt. You know what? Jesus also experienced a lot of fear in the garden. I've never heard anybody talk about that. It's like fear is all bad, yet Jesus is saying, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. I don't think Jesus is going like, hey, the cross is no big deal. No, he knows what he's going to go to. It says he sweat like drops of blood. He was agonizing over this. So if you're in a place where you're overwhelmed, you're anxious, you're facing things that seem too big, I'm just telling you, don't pretend like you don't have to be afraid. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. He's bigger than what you're going through. Go to him with what you have, what you're afraid of, what you're facing. And Jesus from the cross cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? He felt lonely. Not only was he abandoned by his friends, but he felt the loss at the cross. I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow, so I'm not going to teach anymore in that passage because I think sometimes we don't go far enough in that passage. But I do think he understood what it meant to feel the abandonment that maybe some of you feel right now. You know, I promise you God has not left you, but it might feel like it. I promise you he's near, but you might feel like he's far, and it's not wrong to tell him that's what you feel. Psalms give you lots of permission to tell God about that. Jesus also felt the shame of the cross. He scorned it, but he also welcomed it because he knew what was on the other side of it. For the joy that was set before him, he embraced it. He was publicly humiliated. Maybe that's been some of you. You're like, man, I just feel like I just can't get it right. Can't do enough. I feel real shame around this. He wants to come and clothe you with both the awareness that he knows what that's like, but also with the covering of his righteousness to say like, hey, it's okay. You and I can do this together. And maybe there's some of you who are feeling guilt tonight. And I want to be really clear. Some of you have never experienced forgiveness of sins. I'm convinced of that. Anytime I speak in a room like this, I've even had pastors who've been ministering for 20 years say, I finally experienced Christ come in and change my heart from the inside out. And I now know I'm really free. And I'm just telling you, I don't care what you've been doing or how long you've been in this. Some of you have need to experience the freedom of the forgiveness he offers you through his death on the cross. And you don't have to carry the weight of your sin anymore. So if you've been carrying the weight, I'm just telling you, today could be the end of that. You do not have to carry a heavy burden of guilt anymore. Please don't do it. He offers you forgiveness, and he's willing to carry it on himself. I love what Paul said. He who knew no sin became sin so that in him you might become the righteousness of God. He does not want you to carry it. He knows you can't. But let me turn it around one more, the other side. Some of you have been hurt by others and you won't forgive them. And you know who's carrying that sin? You. And he doesn't want you to carry someone else's sin anymore. He already sufficiently paid for it at the cross. So some of you need to release the guilt of someone else on the shoulders of Jesus tonight. So I'm just going to give you a chance. Just bow your heads. And I'm going to start with that last one. There's some of you in the room who have never, ever asked Jesus, confessed your sins and said, Jesus, I need what you did for me on the cross. I need you to lift the weight of my sin off my shoulders. I need your forgiveness. Would you cleanse me? Would you make me new? Would you give me a new heart? I don't want a hard heart anymore. I want a soft heart. Would you come and dwell in me by your Spirit? Would you give me your desires? Would you help me to want what you want and do what you want me to do? So I just want to, maybe that's some of you right now, even now you need to pray that in your heart. But we're going to give you a chance to pray with somebody else as well. Receive what he's done for you at the cross. And experience the new life he offers you in the resurrection. And receive him pouring out his Spirit into your life. Today is the day for you to live a new life.